Tim has been a rancher of over 1,300 mother cows. He has had experience. He grew up in Slayton, Texas. He is a professor of range science at West Texas A&M in Canyon as a joint appointment with AgriLife Extension. Tim has had a lot of experience in the southeastern Colorado region, which is real similar to our region here in terms of rainfall. Tim is the leader of our grass grazing and animal management school that many of you have taken here. And Tim is an absolute professional man that if I can ever learn all that he learns, I'll have done a lot in my life. He's a very smart gentleman. And so, Tim, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the bulletins that you've written that are part of the inserts that we provided the people today. Thank you for your leadership and your golden heart to serve and help others. Dr. Tim Steffens.
Can y'all hear me without this mic?
Tim,
Okay.
we need you to use it so that we can...
Well, I got this one.
Okay, cool.
We're good, Andy. Thank you.
I go kind of to stuttering and maybe even go mute if I can't use my hands. So Andy asked me to come and talk a little bit about wildfire preparedness and a little bit about kind of what to do in the event of fire. And so what I want to talk about a little bit is fire behavior, some preparation and management, some response to that, understand what happens during and after a fire, understand a little bit maybe about plant community responses to fire. I kind of edited on this thing, so some of these I may short a little bit. Understand how conditions before, during, and after a fire affect the severity of effects, and then understand how management interacts with those conditions to influence how long we suffer effects from fire. Historically, they estimate, and I've seen lots of different numbers, some say as often as every 3 years. What I could find that was actually documented, they say about every 6 to 10 years since there's been people in this part of the world, this area, a particular area, a particular acre would burn about every 6 to 10 years before we started kind of trying to suppress that. Generally, the biggest, most intense fires were during dry conditions following a wet year. Is that sounding familiar? That built up a continuity of fine fuels so that the fire would carry easier. If you suppress fire for an extended period of time, and this is what they're finding in Australia right now, that area burned about every 3 years with highly volatile fuels. You suppress that for an extended period of time and you get even more intense fires. It happens in California quite frequently. The big fire, last summer in the Chaparral country in California, burned down an entire town. Those areas, the fuel is so volatile, I've been told, they've had fires occur that they can't find a reason for, so they suspect the fuels just start on fire spontaneously. You suppress that kind of stuff. I mean, though that brush burns like it was soaked in gasoline. And you get where it used to be this tall and now it's this tall. People die and cities go away and that kind of thing. So managing is a big deal. We're not going to stop wildfires. We're going to have this country burn sometime. And so managing what occurs between fires can have a big effect on how big it is, how intense it is, how long the effects last, and how much life and property is at risk when it occurs. For any kind of fire to occur, you got to have conditions that will foster a fire, and you got to have some kind of an ignition. With more people, now we have more sources of ignition. Bearings go out, chains go to dragging along the highway. I've been told by people that throwing a cigarette out the window won't start a fire. We will have to agree to disagree on that. There's all kind of things, highline wires arcing, there's all kind of things that can start a fire. When we start getting those conditions right, we're running the risk of having something start on fire. Power lines, railroads, my dad was a railroader. They started a fire down by Snyder one time because the locomotive was throwing sparks out. I mean, it can be lots of things. Introduced vegetation is not quite as big a deal here, although I'm going to get on a soapbox for a minute here. It baffles me why we are paying to help people put in eastern red cedar windbreaks. That kind of was around here a little bit in the historical times, but we're bringing it in. And this is suppression efforts. We've talked about construction materials and codes. I hope I don't offend anybody here, but in my view, a shake roof in this part of the world is insanity. Vinyl siding I'm not too wild about either. I mean, there are some things, we need to be cognizant of those things in our buildings, because particularly something like a shake roof, you don't have to have a fire get up to the house. You just have to have an ember blow in on top of it, and you've got a structural fire. Landscaping, I'm going to have a couple of pictures that we didn't find any super egregious problems, but there are some things we need to think about in our landscaping that can have a big effect on the chances of having a fire in our structures. Timing of activities and disturbances, maintenance and management practices, and the timing thereof. We need to be getting some fire breaks in before we start having fires. The way a fire behaves is a function of fuel type, the fuel amount, and the conditions and the continuity of that fuel. Topography and wind will have an effect, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a little bit. And then ambient temperature and relative humidity, and they go kind of hand in hand. The hotter it is outside, the closer that fuel is to ignition temperature, and so the easier it starts on fire. As air warms, it's capable of holding more moisture. So a given amount of moisture in a warmer air lowers the relative humidity. And kind of a rule of thumb that I was taught was a 20-degree Fahrenheit temperature rise decreases the relative humidity by half. So you start with a 40% relative humidity, you increase the temperature 20, now you've got a 20% relative humidity. When we're in conditions like we're in, well, maybe not quite right now, but what we can get, we may start the morning, at dawn, we may start at 20 to 25% humidity, you go up 30 degrees, you're getting down into single digit range, and that starts getting to be really scary. What we can do, we can manage fuel loads, and particularly continuity of fuels, particularly around like our headquarters, our houses, things like that. Grazing management, we can do some prescribed burning maybe, we can mow, we can, at the headquarters, if we just got caliche and gravel down where nothing's growing up to it, can be a big deal. We talk about strategic grazing, managing volatile fuels. I wanted to, when Andy and I went out driving around, what I really wanted to find, because I've seen them lots of times, these eastern red cedar windbreaks that have tumbleweeds blown up in them. Now that is a disaster waiting to happen. Evergreen trees like that, if they're moist enough, can be a windbreak. I mean a fire break. But when they get dry enough or hot enough, they burn like they've been soaked in gas. If you got those tumbleweeds blowed up in there, it doesn't have to be that dry, and they can start on fire. So be careful of that. Zoning codes and mandated practices, I know that's probably not a particularly popular thing to think about because we're all we don't want the government in our business, but it can be a big deal. This, I think, is in one of the deals in your handouts. When we're talking about structural, keeping things safe around the headquarters, we got 3 main zones that we've got to worry about. Zone 1 is about 30 feet outside those structures. Zone 2 is out from there to about 100 feet, and then Zone 3 is out to about 200 feet. In that interior zone, you don't want any plants with volatile oils. And basically, when I'm talking about volatile oils, if you stomp through it and you can smell something, that's got a volatile oil in it. Sand sage, cedars, broom snakeweed, things like that. If they have those volatile oils, that is easily atomized and it burns. It is an oil. It burns very readily. It makes for very explosive kind of fires. You want short lawns. You want your trees pruned up 6 feet high at least so that flames underneath them don't start the foliage on fire. We talked about shake roofs, ember-tight vents. You don't want something that something can blow into and start the interior of your house on fire. You want what I don't have here, your gutters along the side of the house. You don't want tree leaves blowing into that where it can catch an ember and start on fire. Ideally, 5 feet out from the house, have in gravel or something like that. My bride will not allow that. That's what I want for fire, and because I don't have to deal with it then. She likes having something grow there. Try to have something that will kind of go away in the dry periods in the winter. Vegetation or combustible materials within 10 feet are a no-no. How many people have you seen with firewood stacked up against the house? How many people have you seen with weeds blown up under a deck that's hooked to the house? That's not a good thing. In that second zone out to 100 feet, you want 30 feet between tree clusters and 20 feet between individual trees. Even something like an oak tree that drops its leaves. Permanent fuel breaks to break up the fine fuels, and we're talking about gravel driveways, caliche driveways, bladed out area, concrete sidewalks, things like that that will stop a ground-driven fire. Now that ain't gonna stop something that's blowing embers out 300 yards out in front of a fire. But it can stop something that's burning along the ground. And then decrease the density and continuity of the fine fuels, get it mowed, graze it out. That's why the good part about the grazing is it goes away. The mowing, you're just laying it down on the ground. You may actually make fuels more continuous that way, but at least they don't burn as high. Zone 3, same thing, decrease that continuity of fuels, manage your windborne fuels that might get caught in trees, and then decrease the fine fuel loads and continuity. Fine fuels, we're talking about primarily grass, or grass and weeds. This just a little example of something that would work really well, particularly if we end up with something like 2017. Basically, you got your headquarters with gravel all the way, or gravel or caliche, and I mean gravel, not gravel with a few weeds growing up through it or something like that. I mean, it needs to be nothing will carry. You may have a gravel or paved road coming in. That's another break in the continuity. Then if you've got, and a lot of people will, they have a little trap around their headquarters or something to keep their horses in there. One good thing about horse pastures, you ain't gonna have much fuel in a horse pasture. That's one of the only things I know good about horse pastures. But you can do that. You can, maybe it's a little bigger area, you may want to put a little bladed area around the outside of it and then come in and burn that out. You may want to mow it down. Anything you can do to decrease the intensity of the fire if it happens to come up to your house. Keep things maintained. This is my problem. I hate a lawnmower with a white hot passion. I don't keep the weeds down like I probably ought to. We're in country where tumbleweeds are gonna blow. I try to kind of keep them thrown out of the fences and stuff, but sometimes I'm a little lax. And so we need to, good intentions, the fire don't care about. It cares about what you actually get done. Another thing that can be very, very, very critical. The fires in 2017. I was on the same program as a gentleman from Kansas. They had the big fires up there at the same time. They lost their house. One of the family members almost died because they weren't sure everybody had gotten away, and they went back in to make sure. Something you need to do. Make sure you know 2 or 3 ways to get away from the house, because the fire may be coming from the direction you planned on. And then make sure everybody in the family knows it's time to bug out. And we're all going right now, and we're going to meet up someplace, because the cell phone lines may be busy, and if you can't get in contact with them, you got to know, yeah, they're headed where we all agreed on. Because if you you're not sure and you try to call and you can't get a hold of them, what are most people gonna do? Well, I gotta take care of my family, right? I'm gonna go back in and make sure. And they end up in trouble. One of my old graduate students, her stepdad was a cousin of my brother-in-law. They had a fire down by Littlefield. He decided he was going to go in. They told him, stay out. You can't do nothing. He said, I'm going to go in. I'm going to save the headquarters. And he did. Died about 3 weeks later from smoke inhalation. When these guys come and if they're scared enough to tell you it's time for you to leave, that means they're scared. Get out. Have those backup plans, the communication plan. The other thing that I've been told happens, I don't know anybody. It's time to leave. These guys have come and told you, you got to go. Oh, I got to go get the insurance papers and the will and my children's photographs, and I got to go hunt down the family dog, and I got to hook up to the trailer so I can load the horses, and something bad happens. If you got all that stuff gathered up and they come and say, it's time to go, you grab all of that important stuff, throw it in the car, and you're gone. So that's a good thing to think about right now and get it put together. In a fire, there's 3 dangers. There's the flame, that's the one everybody thinks about. There's the smoke, lots of people don't think about. And hot gases, almost nobody thinks about. When I went through the basic training for prescribed burning, they beat it into us like hammering sand into a rat hole. Most fatal fires are grass fires. I think there's probably 2 reasons for that. One is, what fool is going to go into a blazing forest with 200 feet of flames? I mean, you would be insane, right? But grass is not that. I've seen grass burn before. It's not a big, I'm Superman, right? If it comes, I'll just step over it. I'll drive through it. It don't work that way a lot of times. Smoke, I told you about my brother-in-law's cousin. The hot gases, one of the little incidents that they talked about was the Storm King fire in Colorado. And over, the story was all, they said, a fire broke out one day. They went out, they swatted it out with their hats, and they thought it was all over with. 2 days later, it flared up and got to be a big fire. This particular big fire burned through an area, but it had been at kind of low intensity, was oak brush, very similar to our scenery. Did not burn the leaves off, so it dried them out real bad, burned on through. They had a hot shot crew up on the side of the mountain. Now these guys are the Navy SEALs of firefighters. I mean, these are the baddest, best trained, super duper firefighters. They're up there, the wind shifts, and the fire burns back through this oak brush. Flames start leaping up, and it's away to the races. Now, fire burns faster up a hill because the flames can preheat the fuel out in front of it, and you got all the heat at the top of the flames, so it's just, these guys see what's going on and they take off just cheeking it to the top of the mountain. I can't remember, you guys probably, 7 guys killed. One of them got to the top of the mountain with the flames licking him on the butt as he got to the top. He's still running, and he jumped and screamed. And they said they think the thing that saved him was the scream, because he was going down that steep side. Because the hot gases from that flame would have seared his lungs, and he'd have been dead before he hit the ground. This ain't something to play with. Beware, it's not a real great picture, but we found something to show. The chimney effect, what I'm talking about, flames burn faster up a hill. They get hotter, and so will burn faster and hotter if they're closed in. If you've got a gully or a little valley or something, we were going to go to your house, David, because that was where a real good place is. You got a fire burning down here, and it gets to the bottom of this little draw or gully that's going up a hill. It's going to shoot up through there like it was blown with a fan. So be careful of that. The other thing, these particularly intense fires, like we had here, like they're having in Australia right now, they can create their own wind. You may be looking at the smoke and you say, oh, well, the wind's coming from this direction, I'm safe. That fire's drawing air to it and going up. That can make, you have a convection shower in the summer, and all of a sudden the wind comes up right by you, and it's coming out of a totally different direction. The same thing can happen with a fire. They're so intense in Australia right now, they're creating their own rain showers. They're throwing air up so high that it condenses and comes back down. I've known of 2 different fires, wildfires, where the firefighters got killed because they had a blowout, they had the oxygen was so low in the air around them they couldn't get it to crank. So don't be saying, oh, I'm in the vehicle, it'll all be okay. The only place it's okay is away from the fire, especially upwind of it or somewhere that's already been burned. This is a little example. Here is a lot of volatile fuel with this sand sage. We got a little bit of broomweed. That can burn very, very hot and very, very fast, especially up this hill. Plan ahead. When you start doing things hastily is when you start making bad decisions. Keep informed of where the fire is, what direction it's going, etc. Have not just the plan, the backup plan. Be ready to go on a short notice. Follow instructions. If the fire department's telling you, you need to go this way, that don't mean some maybe anywhere I want to. That means go that way. That's the safe way. And make sure everybody is going to do that. Stay calm. Find that safe zone. Are y'all going to talk a little bit about finding a safe zone when there ain't one real? Okay, I won't cover that too much. If you're in a vehicle, don't get out of the vehicle. It may get mighty hot in there. But if it gets hot enough to kill you, you were going to die anyways. Now, you may want to get out of it when the fire passes, because if the car tires are on fire and the gasoline starts on fire, that gets to be a problem. But stay with the vehicle. Never drive into smoke or toward the fire. One reason is you don't know how deep it is, and the other reason is you don't know if there's a gully right past the flames that you may drop off into. Remember what is most valuable, and that ain't your stuff. You can always get more stuff. Cows, vehicles, dogs, and I'm a dog, there is no greater dog lover than me. I'm going to try and get them, and I can get mine because they're in pens. But if I'm going to have to hunt for them, if they take off running, I'm sorry for you, buddy, we're done. Clothing, wool does not burn very well. Now the best thing is this Nomex, but y'all ain't got that. Wool burns less well than anything else. Cotton burns less well than everything but wool. And anything that is like this, that's 45%, whatever the heck it is, polyester or spandex, that will melt off. Well, it will melt into you. So be careful about that. If you're in unfamiliar terrain, even if you're in familiar terrain, if the smoke gets thick, you can get turned around, and that's when somebody dies. Unfamiliar weather, you got no communication. If you're a head downhill wind or uphill from a fire, or worse, all of those. If you got any kind of fuel between you and the fire, on hillside, if the weather's getting hotter, drier, or more windy, and rough topography, you may think you can get away from the fire and you get caught somewhere. We talked about the effects are the conditions. Intensity is not just the heat, it's not just the flame length, it's how long does it stay. One of the things, it was really remarkable, and I mean I drive through this country fairly regular, but the fire that we had 3 years ago was very intense. It was very fast moving. Fast moving saves a lot of bad things as far as vegetation goes. You can have a really hot fire that just goes, and the grass is going, if you got soil moisture, the grass is going to come back pretty quick. Now you have a slow moving fire, even if the flames aren't that high, but it just stays there, and you may have it burn for 5 minutes on one grass clump. That grass clump's liable to be dead, or it's dang sure not going to be feeling real spry. Any of y'all go up 287 towards Colorado? Just before you get into Colorado, in Oklahoma, on 287. 2011, that ranch, a big chunk of that ranch right along the highway burned. He finally put the fence up year before last. So what, 6 years. He didn't have enough grass that he thought he could run cows, and so he didn't put the fence up along the highway. Extremely dry, slow moving, very intense fire in dry conditions with dry conditions afterwards. So that has a big deal. Opportunity to recover afterwards is another big deal. If you got a full soil profile, odds are things will recover fairly well, especially if you get a little bit of follow-up rain. You got a dry profile and you don't get anything afterwards, that's going to be a problem. All that's by moisture, wind, humidity, growth conditions afterwards. This was some area that Andy and I went and looked at 2 days ago. We got a lot of fuel. We got some volatile fuels. We got a lot of continuity, and we got a fairly significant slope there. Now, the road was running about right here from that picture. We get a fire start in the road ditch, that's gone. If we've got any kind of dry conditions, that can be pretty dangerous. This isn't as bad as I have seen, but notice we got these cedars with foliage going all the way down, with a dry lawn coming to them, and they're right next to the house. That right there is not good. Here, I mean, this ain't the same house. This is another one. This was maybe 3 miles away from that last picture. And this is in town. This is a little bit better. They've got them trimmed up a little higher. I'm not a huge fan of cedars anyways, but if you got to have cedars, that's the way to do them, and get them up at least 6 feet. 2 things with that. You don't get the flames coming up from this short grass, and you don't have near as much opportunity for those tumbleweeds to get caught up in them. And you can mow underneath. This was where, basically that first picture, they had a fire get started. Now, the good part is, that's pretty safe now for this spring. And I'm saying this in complete seriousness. You can burn that out on purpose, and it's safe. This almost is good. Now, I did not get the picture of the house with it, but they came in and mowed that off. Now we still got continuous fuels, but they're little short ones. That you can kind of fight a fire, and you don't have fire running through it quite so fast. And there was a house, I don't know, maybe 60, 70 yards from there, and they had mowed all the way to the house. Kudos to this person. This even better. You got plowed dirt or you got green foliage that wide between you and a fire, odds are pretty good things are going to turn out okay. Notice they got cattle in there. Even if you ain't got cattle in there, that's some place you can cut the fence or open the gates, and the cattle will generally try to find a safe place to go. Especially if you got all that green in there, they're going to get in there.
Tim, if you don't mind, go back to that slide. That place was protected if the fire was coming from the southwest, but that particular place almost burned to the ground in 17 because the fire came across a pasture that wasn't cut down, and it burned up a lot of their things and almost the house there. So,
and you look in the background, so it wouldn't be a bad idea to do a little bit of fuel management back in there. You see a lot of this in this part of the world. Cottonwoods or elm trees or something where the birds like to sit, and a bunch of little junipers growing underneath it. That's because the birds go eat the juniper berries. They come, they make a deposit, and now you've got a nurse plant. So now you've got a volatile fuel that may grow up into the foliage of this tree. You get hot burning fuels, you can start this on fire, you get an updraft, that sends an ember that may be this big around and can go a long ways and start a fire out a ways from that. This is I mean, I'm a big believer in prescribed fire. I'm not the pyromaniac that most of the prescribed burn people, they ain't never seen a problem they couldn't burn up. I'm not that guy. But if you want to get these cedars under control, the most cost-effective way to do it is with a prescribed burn. You can go broke trying to go cut them off or use Velpar. And if you use Velpar, you're going to kill that elm tree. This was down on the Canadian River. We got a little bit out of Texas at a point or two in our sojourn. And this, I'm pretty sure this was in Oklahoma. This ain't us.
We've got some people here from Oklahoma today.
Okay.
Be careful.
We saw plenty of this in Texas too, but I think this happens to be in Oklahoma. We got a lot of, a heavy buildup of fine fuels that'll carry the fire along the ground if it needs to, or it'll carry it from a windborne fire either. And when it hits into this stuff, it's going to be off to the races, baby, because that's going to be throwing big cinders up, and they can go a long ways. If we don't do something about that, there's going to get to be more of them, they're going to get to be taller, and they're going to get to be thicker. Now there's lots of ways of handling that. We need to start picking some of them and doing something about it. Because that eastern red cedar is not going to go away. The hill country has not always been one gigantic continuous cedar break. If we don't want this country to turn into one, we might ought to start getting on top of that. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Except for this. We got volatile fuels, we got slopes, we got continuous fuels, we got tall continuous fuels. This is a disaster waiting to happen. And I think I'm not sure I remember why I put that one in there, other than that's another. They're starting to get up out of the bottoms. It can happen, and we can end up with this stuff all over. And the good part about eastern red cedar, it ain't like red berry juniper. You burn red berry juniper, it comes back. You burn that, you get the leaves all burned off of it, it's gone, it's dead, it's over. That particular tree. If we can get on it when it's like this, we've gotten on it for a while. If we start trying to do that all with Velpar, you ain't seeing the 200 little seedlings that are out there in the middle of the grass that you can't get with the Velpar. So you're just constantly going out and killing out little spots of grass. If we can burn that, we're going to get most of those little ones.
Tim, tell them how volatile those cedars are in a wildfire.
Well, I started to, I could not find some of my prescribed burning pictures. I don't know where I put them. One of the training deals that I went to on a prescribed burn, Luss Hills of Nebraska, real steep rolling country, lots of eastern red cedar. I was there to learn, so I'm not running a torch. I'm mostly just kind of watching and doing mop up, starting on the backfire side of the fire. Fire's licking along, got flames about like this, and a 2-year-old could have toddled along in front of those flames. They're just kind of shh. And I'm thinking, this ain't no big deal. It burns up to an eastern red cedar about this tall with leaves all the way to the ground. Burns up under it, and I'm thinking, this is going to be a dud. I mean, at least on the backfire side of this fire, they ain't going to get this. They ain't going to meet their objectives. I'm sitting there watching the fire, and it hasn't come out from underneath the tree yet. But I'm watching, and it's kind of going along past it. And directly I see a little old black curl of smoke coming out of the middle of that tree. And about 30 seconds later, it looks like God speaking to Moses. I mean, this thing just, and I mean flames shooting up about 15 feet in the air for about 3 minutes. And then the flames all died down, there's a dead skeleton, and the fire's just licking along going. That's how volatile they can be. So you don't just go out and say, here, hold my beer and watch this. I'm going to start throwing a few matches out here and start a prescribed fire. You better be there ain't no such thing as a controlled burn. You light that match, your control is done. All you're doing with a prescribed burn is you got safety measures in place that you're pretty sure you're going to get it stopped when you want it to. And if it does get away, you're pretty sure you can stop it fairly quick after that. These guys that were training me, they were talking about danger, humidity's dropping, you got a real high ceiling, and I caught them on a break. I said, I'm not here to stomp out fires. I'm here to learn how to set them. I'm here for prescribed burning. And all these things you're talking about, we want that. We want the smoke to carry away. The instructor looked at me and he said, son, there's two kinds of people that do prescribed burning. The ones that have had a fire get away and the ones that are going to. You can't always keep them where you want them. But you can make it where you got enough manpower. And something gets a little outside the line, you go stomp it out, and most of the time, no, I'm not even going to say that. Now notice here, we got lots of little cedars with lots of fuel to get them burned. We can burn that under fairly decent conditions and make them dead. I mean, we can have fire behavior that is something we can get stopped and get put out if we need to. You get cedars that are 6, 8 feet tall. Your prescription is a wildfire that we want to have a lot of black around where it ain't going to get out. And when you light that one up, I mean, it's like wake up your buddy because he ain't never seen nothing like this. That's when we need to get on. Here it is going again. Now, this. What's that? That's a juniper that burned. About that size, in about the same kind of fuel loads. Now you notice there's some of those big ones in the background, they didn't die. I don't know if that was, I have no idea whose place this was. I have no idea what conditions those burned under. It still may have been the wildfire back in 17. I don't know. The wildfire back in 17 did not burn those trees. When we get a wildfire, and we will get a wildfire that starts those trees on fire, you don't want to be close by. That's all I got to say about that. Any comments, any questions, any observations? Anybody want to throw a bologna sausage flag? Yes, ma'am.
Is there anything that works good for a windbreak? I'm not talking right up close to the house, but some distance out, any deciduous or otherwise trees?
So repeat the question, Tim.
This lady asked, is there anything that works good for a windbreak? How much wind do you want to break? I mean, a structure will dang sure break wind. If I'm going to do it vegetatively, and I think there's pretty good reasons to do that. I mean, they're good for quail and wildlife kind of things. If I'm going to do something like that, what I prefer is to have kind of layered species. So I might have skunk bush sumac, if you know what that is. Very dense foliage during the green season. You know, I've seen them get this tall. Most of the time they're going to be like this. Have that down low, then plant I don't know, maybe American plums, elm trees, something like that, kind of behind them where they come up and they've got some branches up above them. But in the winter, and I mean we will have summer fires. But in this, how many summer fires do we have compared to between now and end of March?
So last year we did have a little bit of a summer season, but that's because those cells that are building up, they build up right over us. The lightning strike right there, mostly around the canyon and kind of up in there. So as far as actual numbers, I don't know. But
and those will be generally isolated fires, not big humongo jobbers, right?
yes, sir. They're not going to move as rapidly as what we would have in our winter fires.
By and large, some green vegetation in there so you get more smoke, lower intensity fires, and so it's not quite as big. You get the elm tree, they're going to drop their leaves in the winter, and so, yeah, how many people really love an elm tree? I mean, if you lose it, what's the big, not only that, but the elm tree's going to resprout anyways. So will the skunk bush. So if you lose it, I mean, it's going to come back. Junipers, Joe's not here, is he?
Joe,
Van Zandt.
no.
My good friend Joe Van Zandt accused me of being a mesquite lover one time, right in this very room. I am not a mesquite lover. I just don't hate mesquite as much as lots of other people do. Juniper, eastern red cedar, you're doing God's work, killing them. There is no way to kill a cedar wrong. Some are better than others, but
Tim, tell them, not that this has to do with wildfire, but in an indirect way it does. Tell them about how much water that these junipers and eastern redberry cedars use daily as consumers of our water.
and I don't know a figure, but it's a bunch. And it happens 365 days out of the year. A mesquite will use quite a bit of water if it gets a chance. But when it drops its leaves, it's done for a while. And so it's hurting our water availability. Juniper and eastern red cedar, they put their roots out this way. They compete directly with grass. Mesquite, it's a little less direct, and in fact, sometimes you can see the best grass in the pasture growing under a mesquite tree. So, juniper killing, God's work. Mesquite killing, there's times and places for it. Juniper, that time is any time you see it.
How about Bodark, windbreak?
Bodark has volatile oils in it too. Bodark, though, at least has some redeeming features to it. I mean, you can make fence posts out of it. It's good cover for wildlife. I mean, there's not much to like about a cedar. So, but beware on those Bodark moths, because they can get mighty hot too. Anything else?
Will fire kill mosquitoes?
No. Well, it will top kill. There are guys, friends of mine, who are going around saying, you do a really intense summer burn, you can kill mosquitoes, and there will be some that will actually die. In my view, if I'm wanting to kill mesquite, I'm going to go get herbicide. That's what kills mesquite. And you got to have the right herbicide. Burning, that's like going and trying to kill the cockroaches in your house with a sledgehammer. I mean, you can maybe get it done, but you ain't going to have much house left. Same way with...
On mesquite and shimmery either, it makes it worse.
Yeah.
Because where there was one, they'll come back 10.
Now you got 6 or 8 or 10, and you're going to have to wait a while before you can kill it with a herbicide, because you ain't going to get enough herbicide in the plant on that resprouted stuff. So that, I mean, if you're going to try to kill mesquite, don't play around. Go get the good stuff and kill it the first time, because the more times you try, the harder it's going to be to make it go away. Anything else?